On the 47th floor of a glass tower overlooking Manhattan, the city looked small. Cars crawled like ants. People moved like dots. And inside that boardroom, silence weighed more than the skyline. Red numbers glowed on the screens. Missed targets, falling graphs. 20 executives sat around a black marble table, shoulders tight, breathing shallow. No one spoke. They were waiting. The door clicked open. Grant Whitmore walked in like a man who owned gravity itself. Tailored charcoal suit. Italian shoes polished to a mirror shine. A watch worth more than most people's homes. Hair slicked back, jaw clenched, eyes cold. He didn't greet anyone. He slammed his leather briefcase onto the table, hard enough to make everyone flinch. "Which one of you," he said slowly, voice sharp as broken glass, "can explain how a billion-dollar company fails 3 quarters in a row?" No one answered. Grant began walking around the table, footsteps echoing, predator calm. People shrank as he passed. Kuru. And then he stopped. At the far end of the table sat someone who didn't belong. A man in a plain white shirt, no logo, no brand, old shoes, clean, but worn, posture straight, hands resting calmly on the table. Grant stared at him, not with anger, with disgust. And in that moment, without knowing it, Grant Whitmore was about to humiliate the only man who could see straight through him. And that single act would destroy everything he thought made him powerful. Before the story goes any further, take a second and subscribe to Heaven Walks With Us. These stories aren't about perfection. They're about truth, redemption, and the moments that quietly change a life forever. If you believe even broken people can be restored, this channel is for you. Grant Whitmore turned fully toward the man at the end of the table. "You," he said quietly. The room stiffened. "What's your name?" The man met his gaze without flinching. "Michael." Just that. No title. No apology. "Michael," Grant repeated slowly, tasting the name like something bitter. "Did you look in a mirror this morning before coming here?" A few executives exchanged uneasy glances. Michael didn't answer right away. He didn't look down. He didn't defend himself. "Yes," he said calmly. Grant let out a humorless laugh and took a step closer. "Then help me understand," Grant continued, voice rising, "how someone thinks it's acceptable to walk into this room, this company, dressed like that." "My clothes are clean," Michael replied. Simple, factual. Grant moved closer. "Clean?" he snapped. "Is that your standard? Because this," he gestured sharply around the room, "this is a billion-dollar operation, not a shelter, not a classroom." Someone tried to intervene. "Sir, he's from maintenance." "He was asked to." "I didn't ask you," Grant cut him off, eyes never leaving Michael. He leaned in. "You are the perfect symbol of what's dragging this company down," Grant said. "People who don't look the part, don't understand where they are." The air turned thick. Michael inhaled slowly. "Is this about my clothes?" he asked gently. "Or is it about something else?" The question landed like a crack in glass. Grant's face flushed red. "I'm going to teach you a lesson," he said, turning away. "A lesson you'll remember for the rest of your life." He walked to the corner of the room where a cleaning bucket sat, left over from a product demo earlier that morning. A few people shifted in their chairs. Someone whispered, "No." Grant grabbed the bucket, and as he lifted it over Michael's head, no one moved. No one stopped him. And the room was about to learn what happens when power mistakes cruelty for strength. Grant Whitmore lifted the bucket higher. For a brief second, his eyes flicked around the room, not for permission, but for witnesses. 20 executives sat frozen. Some stared, some looked away. No one stood up. "Want respect?" Grant said, his voice low and poisonous. "Then you need to look respectable." The bucket tilted. Water poured down in a sudden cascade. It soaked Michael's white shirt, clung to his hair, streamed down his face and arms, splashing onto the polished marble floor. The sound was loud, ugly, final. For 3 eternal seconds, that was the only sound in the room. A nervous laugh escaped someone's throat and died immediately. Another executive swallowed hard and stared at the table. One woman's hand flew to her mouth. Michael didn't move. He didn't wipe his face. He didn't shake the water from his sleeves. He just stood there, drenched, breathing slowly. Grant dropped the empty bucket. It clattered across the floor. "There," Grant said, turning away with satisfaction. "Now you're clean." He started walking back toward the head of the table. "That's enough," he added, without looking back. "Next time, dress appropriately or don't come at all." And then Michael spoke. "Grant, not Mr. Whitmore, not Sir, just Grant." The room snapped back into focus. Grant stopped mid-step. He turned slowly, disbelief etched across his face. "What did you say?" he demanded. Michael straightened, water dripping from his sleeves onto the floor. "I said," he repeated calmly, "you've always been afraid of being seen." Grant laughed, sharp, broken. "Who do you think you are?" he snapped. "Talking to me like that?" Michael took one step forward. "Someone who knows," he said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You know what?" Grant scoffed. "You're soaked. You're delusional. And you're done here." Michael didn't raise his voice. "Do you want me to start with the Zacatecas contract?" he asked softly. "Or the reports you buried to protect your image?" Grant's smile vanished. "What are you talking about?" he said, too quickly. Michael's eyes never left his. "How many people did you silence?" he continued, "so the numbers would look clean?" Someone near the glass door lifted a phone, quietly. Grant felt it then. Not anger, fear. Because the man he had just humiliated was looking at him as if he could see everything. And for the first time in 15 years, Grant Whitmore realized he wasn't the one in control of the room anymore. Grant Whitmore took a step forward, trying to reclaim the space. "You're threatening me," he said, lifting his chin. "That's what this is." Michael shook his head, slowly. "I'm not threatening you," he replied. "I'm seeing you." The words cut deeper than shouting ever could. Grant forced a laugh, but it came out cracked. "You're insane," he said. "You think you can walk in here, dress like a nobody, embarrass yourself, and suddenly, Michael interrupted, voice steady, you feel exposed." Grant's jaw tightened. "You bought those signatures," Michael continued calmly, "because you were afraid the board would see the truth. You buried the report because the truth would cost you approval. And every time you chose your image over honesty, you told yourself it was necessary." The room felt smaller. Executives near the glass wall had stopped pretending not to listen. Two of them stood frozen in the doorway. Grant's face drained of color. "I don't know what game you think you're playing," he said, "but this ends now." Michael tilted his head slightly. "You notice something?" he asked. "I called you Grant, not Mr. Whitmore, not CEO." "So what?" Grant snapped. "And you answered," Michael said softly, like someone who's been waiting to be called by his real name. A murmur rippled across the table. One woman lowered her head, eyes glistening. Another stared at Grant, not with admiration, but doubt. Michael turned slowly toward the others. "You think you know him," he said. "You call him demanding, tough, necessary." He paused. "How many of you cried alone after meetings like this? How many of you went home questioning your worth? How many of you stayed silent because speaking up felt more dangerous than being humiliated?" A woman near the center of the table began to cry quietly. "Enough!" Grant shouted. "Get out! Get out now!" Michael turned back to him. "When you sold internal information for protection," he said, "how much did you take?" The silence shattered. One of the executives near the door raised his phone higher. The red recording light turned on. Grant saw it, and in that instant, something inside him collapsed. Because power can survive cruelty, it can survive fear, but it cannot survive truth once someone dares to record it. And Grant Whitmore suddenly understood. This wasn't a confrontation anymore. It was the beginning of his fall. "Security!" Grant Whitmore barked, his voice sharp and desperate. "Get him out of here! Now!" No one moved. Grant turned toward the door, expecting guards to appear, expecting obedience. But the hallway beyond the glass was frozen. Executives stood there, phones raised, eyes wide. Grant swallowed. Michael didn't smile. He didn't argue. He nodded slowly, as if this was exactly how the moment was meant to end. "As you wish," he said. He turned and began walking toward the exit, water still dripping from his clothes, leaving dark spots on the marble floor. Each step echoed louder than the last. When he reached the doorway, Michael stopped. The entire room held its breath. He turned back one final time. "Grant," he said, not loudly, not gently, just clearly. "You're not afraid of falling." Grant stiffened. "You're afraid of being seen falling," Michael continued, "because then everyone would know what you've always known." The words landed and stayed. That you were never as powerful as you pretended to be. Michael stepped out. The glass door closed behind him with a soft click. Grant stood alone at the head of the table. No applause, no approval, only eyes. 20 pairs of them, watching him differently now. Not with fear, with doubt. One executive near the wall lowered his phone and whispered to another, "We need to investigate this." Grant heard it, and for the first time in 15 years, he didn't know what to say. He forced his shoulders back, straightened his suit, and walked out of the room. But the hallway felt longer than it ever had. People stepped aside as he passed, not out of respect, but unease. Inside the elevator, alone at last, Grant stared at his reflection in the mirrored wall. The suit was still perfect, the hair still in place, but his eyes were terrified. His phone vibrated. Once, twice, again. Grant pulled it out. A link. He tapped it. The video loaded. The angle was imperfect. The sound slightly muffled, but it was clear enough. A CEO, a bucket of water, a man standing still. The view count refreshed. 30,000. Then 50. Grant's chest tightened. The elevator descended in silence. And somewhere between floors 47 and 1, Grant Whitmore realized something had shifted. This wasn't damage control. This was collapse. Grant Whitmore didn't make it out of the building before the world caught up with him. By the time he reached the parking garage, his phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Notifications stacked faster than he could read them. He unlocked the screen. The video was everywhere. X, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, his own battlefield. Billionaire CEO humiliates employee over clothes. Power without mercy. This is corporate culture. The view count climbed by the second. Hundreds of thousands. Then 1 million. Grant dropped into the driver's seat and shut the door, hands shaking. He scrolled in disbelief. Clips slowed down, zoomed in, looped. Memes already existed. His face frozen mid-motion, the water mid-air. Commentary threads dissected his tone, his posture, his smile. Disgusting. Fire him. This man is the problem. Grant tossed the phone onto the passenger seat like it burned. "This isn't happening," he muttered. The phone buzzed again. A message from the board chair. "Emergency meeting, 9:00 a.m. Be there." Grant leaned back and closed his eyes. And without warning, a memory he had buried for decades clawed its way to the surface. He was 17 again, standing in a public school cafeteria line. Plastic tray in his hands, shoes worn thin at the soles. 3 boys in private school uniforms stood behind him, laughing. "Hey," one of them said loudly, pointing. "Looks like this guy shops in dumpsters." The others laughed harder. Grant, back then just Grant, kept his head down. Didn't answer, didn't fight. But when he looked up, he saw it in their eyes. Not anger, dismissal, like he didn't exist. That night, sitting on his bed in a dark apartment, he made a promise to himself. "I will never be invisible again. Never." The memory snapped away as the garage lights flickered on. Grant opened his eyes. His chest felt tight. He grabbed the phone again. A new message had arrived. From an unknown number. You're not afraid of falling. You're afraid of being seen falling. Grant stared at the screen. His heart pounded. Because somehow, the man he had humiliated had reached him again. And Grant Whitmore was starting to realize this wasn't just about a video. It was about everything he had built to avoid being seen. Grant Whitmore didn't sleep. He lay on his bed in the penthouse, staring at the ceiling as the city hummed below. Sirens, engines, distant voices living lives that didn't know his name. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it again. The water, the silence. The man who didn't look angry, only sad. At 12:37 a.m., Grant gave up. He dressed, not in a suit, but in dark slacks and a plain jacket, and stepped into the hallway. He told himself he needed documents from his car. Something practical. Something normal. The elevator doors slid open. Grant pressed the button for parking level 3. The doors began to close. Then, a hand slipped between them. The doors opened again. Michael stepped inside. Dry, clean, the same white shirt, unwrinkled, the same calm posture. Grant froze. "You can't be here," Grant said hoarsely. "This building has security. Cameras. I'll call." "You won't," Michael said quietly, eyes forward. The elevator descended. Grant backed against the wall, heart racing. "How did you get in?" he demanded. "You followed me. You hacked something. You—" Michael turned his head slowly, and in that look, Grant felt something twist inside his chest. It wasn't threat. It wasn't superiority. It was recognition, as if this man had known him longer than anyone ever had. "Who are you?" Grant whispered. Michael inhaled. "I was there," he said, "when you were 17, in the cafeteria." When they laughed, Grant's blood ran cold. "What?" he stammered. "That's impossible. I saw you grip the tray so hard your fingers went white," Michael continued. "And I heard the promise you made that night." Grant shook his head. "No," he said. "You researched me. That's all this is." "I was there," Michael repeated gently, "when you decided being powerful was safer than being seen." The elevator slowed. Grant's legs felt weak. "And I was there," Michael added, "the night you forged your partner's signature to close your first big deal." Grant slammed his hand against the wall. "Stop!" he shouted. The elevator came to a halt. The doors slid open. Parking level 3. Michael stepped out, then turned back. Grant was trembling now. "Who are you?" he asked again, voice breaking. Michael met his eyes. "I am Jesus." The words hung in the air. Grant laughed, sharp, hysterical. "No," he said. "No, you're not." But even as he said it, a terrible thought crept in. What if the man he had tried to destroy was the only one who had ever truly seen him? Grant staggered out of the elevator, his laughter breaking apart as soon as it left his mouth. "Jesus!" he scoffed, voice shaking. "That's insane. You're insane." Michael, Jesus, didn't react. He simply stood there in the dim concrete garage, fluorescent lights humming overhead. "I'm an atheist," Grant snapped, desperate to anchor himself to something solid. "I don't believe in God. I don't believe in you. I don't believe in any of this." "I know," Jesus said calmly. Grant laughed again, harsher this time. "You know?" he barked. "You don't know anything about me." Jesus took a step closer, not threatening, not rushed. "You decided God wasn't real," he said. "The night your father hit your mother and no one came to stop it." Grant froze. His breath caught. "That was when you were 9, Jesus continued softly. "You waited. You listened for footsteps. You told yourself if God existed, he would have intervened." Grant's knees weakened. "You don't get to say that," he whispered. "But no one did," Jesus said. "So you decided God didn't exist, because believing he did would have hurt more." Tears burned behind Grant's eyes, but rage held them back. "So where were you?" he shouted. "If you were real, where were you when I needed you?" The words echoed through the garage. Jesus didn't answer immediately. He looked at Grant, not with defense, not with judgment, with grief. "I was there," he said firmly, "but you learned to look away, because blaming me felt safer than facing the pain." Grant shook his head violently. "No," he said. "You're lying. You studied me. You manipulated." "The thing you're most afraid of right now," Jesus interrupted, "isn't losing your position. It isn't the video. It isn't the money." Grant clenched his fists. "It's standing in front of a mirror and realizing you became exactly like the boys who laughed at you." The truth landed like a blow. Grant's legs gave out. He sank to the cold concrete floor, breathing fast, hands trembling. Jesus knelt in front of him, bringing his eyes level with Grant's. "You can push me away again," he said quietly. "You can call security. You can tell yourself this is madness." He placed a steady hand on Grant's shoulder. "But you can't unsee the truth now," he continued. "And you know it." Grant stared into his eyes, and for a brief, unbearable moment, he saw everything. Every lie, every compromise, every person he crushed to feel larger. And beneath it all, forgiveness. Not cheap, not easy, but real. Grant gasped and shoved Jesus backward, scrambling to his feet. "Get out!" he yelled. "Get out of my life." Jesus stood, unshaken. "You can have the truth," he said gently, "or you can have control." He turned toward the stairwell. "Tomorrow," he added, without looking back, "everything you built will fall." The door closed. Grant Whitmore was left alone in the garage, shaking, and for the first time in his life, afraid not of losing everything, but of what might remain once he did. Morning came without mercy. Grant Whitmore walked into the boardroom at 8:58 a.m. 3 lawyers trailing behind him like shadows. Navy suit, red tie, spine straight. From a distance, he looked the same. Up close, the dark circles under his eyes told the truth. The room was different today. The table was the same dark wood, polished to a dull shine, but the energy had shifted. 12 board members sat already in place. No one stood to greet him. Grant's jaw tightened. "Good morning," he said evenly. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," the board chair replied, his tone neutral, almost distant. "Please, have a seat." Grant sat. A folder lay at every seat, thick, sealed, heavy with consequence. "We'll proceed directly," the chair continued. "This emergency session was called due to recent events that have compromised the company's integrity." Grant clasped his hands under the table. "The video," he began, "was taken out of context. That individual was—" "It's not just the video," a board member interrupted. "Audits conducted overnight revealed irregularities in multiple contracts." Grant felt the floor tilt. "That's false," he said quickly. "I can explain every—" "3 independent firms confirmed the findings," the chair said calmly. "And that's before we address the 14 formal complaints filed by former employees." 14? Grant laughed, sharp and hollow. "This is coordinated," he said. "Someone is paying them." The chair leaned forward. "We have emails, voice recordings, medical documentation." Silence settled like dust. One board member spoke quietly. "This isn't an incident, Grant. It's a pattern." Grant looked around the table, searching for an ally. No one met his eyes. "The vote," the chair said, opening his folder, "was conducted earlier this morning." Grant's breath caught. 10 votes in favor, the chair continued. 2 opposed. Grant stood abruptly. "You don't have the authority." "We do," the chair replied, sliding a document across the table. "Effective immediately. You are removed as CEO." The words landed like a gunshot. "Removed. Your access credentials have been deactivated," the chair added. "Security will escort you out." The door opened. Two guards entered. New faces. Unfamiliar. Grant stared at them. For 15 years, he had commanded rooms like this. Now, he had nothing to command. Let's go, sir, one guard said, respectful but firm. Grant picked up his briefcase. As he turned toward the exit, he heard someone murmur, "At last." The door closed behind him, and for the first time since he was 17 years old, Grant Whitmore walked away from a room with no power left to protect him. Grant Whitmore didn't go home. He wandered the city for hours, moving without direction, past people who once would have recognized him, and now didn't look twice. By noon, his phone rang again. This time, it was his attorney. "Grant," the voice said without greeting, "we have a problem." Grant stopped on a street corner, traffic rushing past. "What now?" he snapped. "A class action lawsuit," the attorney replied. 23 former employees, workplace abuse, psychological harm, hostile environment. Grant laughed weakly. "That's ridiculous. I never." "They have documentation," the attorney cut in. "Emails, recorded meetings, medical evaluations." One of them attempted self-harm. The words knocked the air out of him. "Who?" Grant whispered. "I can't say yet," the attorney answered. "But this is moving fast." The call ended. Grant stood there, phone pressed to his ear long after the line went dead. 23. His legs carried him home on instinct. Inside the penthouse, sunlight poured through the windows, lighting everything he had once called success. Glass, steel, silence. Grant dropped his briefcase and opened his laptop. He searched for anything, any leverage, any angle, any escape, names, old contacts, people who owed him favors. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he typed a message to a private fixer, someone known for handling problems. "I need certain documents to disappear. I'll pay well." He stared at the words. For a moment, just one, he hesitated. Then fear won. He hit send. The reply came faster than he expected. "You've already been leaked." Grant's heart slammed against his ribs. "What?" he muttered, refreshing his phone. There it was, a screenshot of his email, posted everywhere. Millions of views in minutes. Ex-CEO tries to destroy evidence. From accused to guilty. Grant staggered back, his laptop sliding off the couch and hitting the floor. The door behind him creaked. "You chose fear," a voice said calmly. Grant spun around. Jesus stood in the living room, hands at his sides, expression steady. "You don't understand," Grant shouted. "I was protecting myself." "From what?" Jesus asked. "From losing everything." Jesus stepped closer. "You already lost what wasn't real," he said. "Now you're fighting to protect the lie." Grant's chest tightened. "I built something," he insisted. "No," Jesus replied firmly. "You took from people who trusted you." Grant slid down onto the couch, head in his hands. "I can't survive this," he whispered. Jesus looked at him with quiet certainty. "The man you pretended to be won't," he said. "But the man you could become still has a chance." Grant didn't answer, because deep down, he knew. Fear had just sealed the path ahead. 2 weeks later, Grant Whitmore stood at the courthouse steps alone. No driver, no assistants, no cameras he controlled, only reporters. "Mr. Whitmore, did you try to destroy evidence? How does it feel to be sued by 23 former employees?" Grant kept his head down as a security officer cleared a narrow path. The doors closed behind him, muting the noise. Inside, the courtroom felt smaller than he expected. White walls, cold lights, 2 tables facing each other. Grant sat with his attorneys, stiff and silent. Across from him sat the plaintiff's lawyer, a woman in her 40s, hair pulled back tight, eyes sharp. Behind her, 23 people, former employees. Grant recognized several faces. People he had yelled at, dismissed, forgotten. The judge entered. The gavel struck once. This court will hear case 2847A, the judge announced. Class action workplace abuse versus Grant Whitmore. Grant swallowed. The plaintiff's lawyer stood. We will begin with testimony, she said. She called the first witness. A woman stepped forward, hands trembling slightly. Please state your name. Emily Carter, she said quietly. How long did you work under Mr. Whitmore? 7 years. Grant stared straight ahead. Describe the work environment. Emily took a breath. At first, I thought he was demanding, she said. But over time, I realized it wasn't about excellence. It was about control. The room was silent. He humiliated people publicly, Emily continued. Meetings like the one in the video weren't rare. They were normal. Grant felt something tighten in his chest. Can you give an example? Emily nodded. Once, I made a minor error in a report, she said. He called me out in front of the entire team and said my degree was proof that education doesn't equal intelligence. Grant closed his eyes. How did that affect you? I stopped sleeping, she said, her voice breaking. I started having panic attacks. I was prescribed medication while I was still employed. Documents were passed to the judge. The defense attorney stood. Isn't it true, he asked, that corporate environments are stressful by nature? Emily met his gaze. Stress is one thing, she said. Cruelty is another. The judge nodded. Next witness. As the second and third testimonies followed, long hours, threats of termination, denied medical leave, Grant's defenses collapsed one by one. Because numbers can argue, but pain doesn't negotiate. And Grant Whitmore was finally hearing what his power had drowned out for years. The courtroom had grown heavy by the time the plaintiff's attorney stood again. She adjusted the papers in her hand, then looked toward the judge. Your Honor, she said, we call our final witness. Grant Whitmore's stomach tightened. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Michael stepped inside. Plain white shirt, dark pants, worn shoes, clean, simple. Nothing about him demanded attention. And yet, the room shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No gasp. No sudden silence. It was quieter than that, like a candle being lit in a dark room. Michael walked to the stand, raised his hand, and swore to tell the truth. He sat. Grant felt his chest tighten as their eyes met. Mr. Ibarra, the attorney began, you are the employee shown in the video that went viral. Is that correct? Yes, Michael said calmly. Please describe what happened that day. Michael inhaled slowly. I was called into a meeting, he said. I worked in maintenance. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes they needed access to rooms or equipment. He paused. When I arrived, Mr. Whitmore noticed my clothes. He decided they meant I didn't belong. Grant lowered his gaze. What happened next? The attorney asked. He humiliated me, Michael replied. Verbally first, then he hesitated, just for a second. He poured water on me. The courtroom was silent. How did that make you feel? The attorney asked. Michael thought for a moment. Sad, he said simply. Not for myself, for him. The attorney blinked. For him. Michael turned his head slightly toward Grant. Because I saw a man so afraid of being small, he said, that he needed others to feel smaller. Grant's throat tightened. Mr. Ibarra, the attorney continued carefully, do you hold resentment toward Mr. Whitmore? Michael didn't answer right away. Then he said, clearly, no. A ripple passed through the courtroom. I forgive him. Murmurs broke out. The judge struck the gavel. Order. The attorney looked stunned. You forgive him, she repeated, for what he did to you? Yes, Michael said. Grant's eyes burned. But, Michael continued, turning back toward the judge, forgiveness does not erase truth. The room stilled again. People were harmed, Michael said. Humiliation, fear, and abuse have consequences. He looked back at Grant one last time. I forgive him, he said softly, but justice must still be done. The attorney nodded slowly. No further questions. As Michael stepped down from the stand, he passed Grant. No words, just a hand, briefly, on Grant's shoulder. Grant felt it, warm, steady, and for the first time since this began, he wasn't afraid of the verdict. He was afraid of what he would do with the truth once it arrived. The judge returned after 3 hours of deliberation. The courtroom rose to its feet as the gavel struck once. "Please be seated." Grant Whitmore remained standing a moment longer than everyone else, as if his legs hadn't yet accepted what was coming. Then he sat. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at the documents. "Having reviewed the evidence, testimony, and corroborating material," he said evenly, "this court finds the defendant, Grant Whitmore, guilty of systemic workplace abuse, abuse of authority, and the creation of a hostile work environment." The words echoed, "Guilty." Grant closed his eyes. "The court orders financial compensation in the amount of $50,000 per plaintiff," the judge continued, "totaling $1,150,000. Grant felt the air leave his lungs. "Additionally," the judge said, "the defendant will complete 600 hours of community service in organizations serving vulnerable workers." A pause. "And finally," the judge added, "evidence of contractual irregularities will be forwarded to the appropriate authorities for further investigation." The gavel struck again. "This session is adjourned." The room erupted. Some plaintiffs cried quietly. Others hugged each other. A few simply sat in stunned silence. Grant remained still. His lawyers leaned toward him, speaking urgently, but he didn't hear them. All he could hear was the word repeating in his head, "Guilty, guilty, guilty." In the hallway outside, reporters surged forward. "Mr. Whitmore, do you regret your actions? Do you accept the verdict? Are you going to appeal?" Grant didn't answer. He walked past them like a ghost. In an empty corridor, he finally stopped and leaned against the wall. His legs gave out. He slid down slowly until he was sitting on the floor. Tears came, not dramatic, not loud, just steady, not tears of self-pity, tears of recognition. He had lost everything. The title, the power, the reputation, and for the first time, he couldn't argue that it was unfair. "You still have a choice." Grant looked up. Jesus stood a few feet away, hands relaxed at his sides. "What choice?" Grant asked hoarsely. "There's nothing left." Jesus stepped closer. "You lost everything built on lies," he said. "But you haven't lost the chance to become real." Grant let out a broken laugh. "No one will respect me now." Jesus looked at him gently. "You still care about being seen," he said. "That's the last thing you'll have to let go." Grant wiped his face. "And then what?" Jesus answered without hesitation. "Then you learn," he said. "In service, in humility, in silence." Grant nodded slowly. He didn't understand how. He only knew he was done fighting. And for the first time in his life, that didn't feel like defeat. The soup kitchen smelled like boiled vegetables and soap. Grant Whitmore stood over a massive metal pot, sleeves rolled up, an apron tied awkwardly around his waist. Steam rose into his face as he stirred. This was hour 112 of 600. At first, he had come angry, silent, doing the minimum. He didn't talk to anyone, didn't make eye contact. But day after day, the stories seeped in anyway. Men who had lost jobs they couldn't replace. Women choosing between rent and medicine. Families who smiled politely while hiding fear behind their eyes. They all shared something Grant recognized too well. The fear of being invisible. "Grant," a voice called, "can you carry these trays to table 5? It was Rosa, the coordinator. Short, 60, unstoppable. "Yes," Grant replied. He lifted the trays and walked carefully through the room. At table 5 sat a young family. Parents tired. 2 small children swinging their legs under plastic chairs. "Thank you," the father said quietly. "You're welcome," Grant replied. He turned back toward the kitchen and collided with someone. A plastic cup tipped. Water spilled. It splashed across the table, across Grant's shirt. The sound stopped him cold. The smell, the sensation. His chest tightened. The boardroom, the bucket, the silence. Grant's hands began to shake. I'm sorry, the young volunteer stammered. I didn't see you. Grant didn't answer. He stared at the water spreading across the floor. Something cracked. Not anger, understanding. Slowly, Grant set the trays down. Then he knelt. He took a cloth and began wiping the water carefully, deliberately, as if the floor itself were something fragile. People walked past. No one noticed. But Grant felt it. Not as an idea, not as guilt, as truth in his bones. I did this to someone. Not metaphorically, not accidentally. He had made another human being feel like this. Grant's shoulders trembled. Tears fell, not loud, not dramatic, just real. When he looked up, someone was standing near the doorway. Jesus. Simple clothes. Quiet presence. No words. Grant rose slowly and walked toward him. He stopped a few feet away. I was that man, Grant said, voice breaking. I became him. Jesus nodded. I know. I hurt people, Grant whispered. I don't know if I can fix this. Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder. You can't, he said gently. Some things don't get fixed. They scar. Grant swallowed. Then what do I do? Jesus answered without hesitation. You live, he said. You serve. You stop running from being small. Grant closed his eyes. For the first time in decades, he didn't resist. And in that quiet surrender, something new began. Grant finished his 600th hour on a quiet Thursday afternoon. No announcement. No applause. Rosa handed him a thin envelope near the sink. That's your completion certificate, she said. You're officially done. Grant opened it, read the single page, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He didn't feel relief. He felt loss. Somewhere along the way, this place had stopped being punishment. It had become grounding. You know, Rosa added, wiping her hands on a towel. If you want to come back as a volunteer, the door is always open. Grant smiled. A small, real one. I'll be here next week, he said. That night, Grant returned to his apartment. Not the penthouse, a modest one-bedroom on the 10th floor, overlooking a parking lot, used couch, second-hand table. Honest. He sat down and stared at his hands. They were different now. Calloused. Stained with work that didn't disappear with soap. He picked up his phone. There was a message he had read 100 times and never answered. Dad, I know things are complicated, but I'd like to talk when you're ready. Grant took a breath and typed, Hi, sweetheart. I'm sorry it took me so long. If you still want to talk, I'd really like that. He hesitated, then pressed to send. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Hi, Dad? Yes. Can I call you now? Grant swallowed. Yes, he typed. The phone rang seconds later. Hi, Dad, she said again, careful, unsure. Hi, Grant replied. They talked about small things first. Her job, the weather, then silence. I saw everything, she said finally. The trial, the service. Grant closed his eyes. I'm not going to ask for forgiveness, he said quietly, because saying sorry isn't enough. But I want you to know I'm trying to live differently. There was a pause. I know, she said softly. I can hear it. Something loosened in Grant's chest. After they hung up, he stood by the window. Cars came and went. People passed without looking up. Once, that would have terrified him. Now it didn't. For the first time in his life, Grant wasn't performing. He wasn't impressive. He wasn't feared. He was simply there. And strangely enough, that felt like freedom. Grant Whitmore was walking home at dusk when he saw him again. Jesus sat on a park bench beneath a tree just beginning to lose its leaves. Simple clothes. Hands resting on his knees. Waiting, without urgency. Grant slowed, then sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. The city still knows my face, Grant said finally. Not for the right reasons. Jesus nodded. I lost the title, Grant continued. The money, the reputation. Some people will never forgive me. I know, Jesus said. My marriage didn't survive, Grant added. Friends disappeared. Doors closed. I know. Grant breathed in the cool air. But, he said quietly, for the first time in my life, I'm not pretending. Jesus turned to look at him. And how does that feel? Grant thought. Terrifying, he admitted. But real. Jesus smiled. Then you learned, he said. Grant stared at the ground. I used to think being small meant being worthless, he said. That if no one noticed me, I didn't matter. Jesus stood. You were never meant to be great, he said gently. You were meant to be true. Grant looked up. What do I do now? He asked. Jesus took a step back. You keep serving, he replied. You keep listening. You let the truth be bigger than your shame. He began to walk away. Wait, Grant said. Jesus stopped and turned. You're real, Grant said, voice steady now. I know it. Jesus smiled, soft, knowing. You already know the answer, he said. The question is when you'll stop fighting it. And then he was gone. Grant remained on the bench as the city lights flickered on. He hadn't regained what he lost. The world hadn't forgotten. But he had found something quieter and stronger. Peace. Not because he was forgiven by everyone, but because he was finally honest. And that was enough. If this story spoke to you, subscribe to Heaven Walks With Us. We share stories about broken people, quiet redemption, and the moments when truth changes everything. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be impressive. You just need to be real and walk forward with us.